said, this is on GMP certifications, taking facilities and products to the next level. My name is Brad Slaughter. I am the president and CEO of Nature Secret Holdings, which is a portfolio company that owns 7 subsidiaries, 6 of them being in the CBD market. We focus on education, proper regulation, and making sure the right products are for the right price for our consumers. I'm just going to go down the line and have everyone introduce themselves as we go down. We'll start with Tweet.
Regulatory affairs. Oh, goodness. See, now it makes noise here, but okay. Can you hear me? Is this okay? My name is Thuy Vu, and I'm the Director of Operations and Regulatory Affairs for Hammer Enterprises.
And Anthony?
My name is Anthony Smith. I'm Chief Science Officer for Evio Laboratories, a chain of analytical labs focused on cannabis and hemp testing across North America. My background is in both molecular and cell biology and biochemistry.
Craig?
Check. All right. Okay, we got one. My name is Craig Nandu. I'm the president and co-founder of JBK Wellness Labs. We're a dietary supplement and cosmetic products manufacturer based in San Diego.
And Laura?
Is that on? Okay.
All right.
Hi, Laura Bright with Root Engineers. We're a division of Colbright Engineering. We're located in Bend, Oregon. I'm the president and CEO, and we've been in the cannabis space for about 4 years now. Our expertise is mainly mechanical, electrical, plumbing, facility design, so familiar with the GMP requirements surrounding that.
Awesome. So just to blast through this abstract, good manufacturing practices are what set apart an amateur operation with no consistency from an industrial facility that is capable of meeting customers' needs by delivering high-quality products. When a factory wants to demonstrate that they are capable of playing in the big leagues, they seek out the international stamp of GMP certification. Not only is it an external demonstration that the facility can operate at an internationally acceptable level, but the certification process itself requires that the management and the operators learn to adhere to a strict set of guidelines at all times. In other words, it is a badge of an internally valid company structure. Now, just to clarify, the FDA has slightly changed its phrasing. The products now will be labeled as CGMP, current good manufacturing practices, and products that are not conforming with CGMP are classified as adulterated. Now, to start off, from each of the panelists, can each of you give me an example of how GMP certifications have helped your company or a company you have consulted?
I'll go ahead and start. So at Hammer Enterprises, what we do is we ensure that we streamline all of our practices and processes, and we document all of this. Now, does that sound familiar to you? If any of you are familiar with ISO accreditation, we are pursuing our ISO 9001 as well as our ISO 22000. 9001 is specific to the quality management system, and the 22000 is specific to the food safety management system. And so what we do is we document everything, we do what we say what we do, and we verify and validate everything with record keeping. And so if there's any sort of internal audit, second-party audit, or third-party audits, everyone can verify everything that we do. In addition to that, if we identify non-conformances or discrepancies in documentation or whatever it is, we have corrective actions that we can show. So not every company is perfect. But when you're able to identify any sort of issues that may arise, you're able to streamline your practice and prepare for and anticipate any sort of issues that may arise and mitigate those by having a quality management system.
Anthony, I know you were talking about when we just met, labs don't really focus on GMP certifications, but more on the ISO side.
Sure. Laboratories, we generally, for our accreditations, are focused on ISO accreditations. In Oregon, something similar to ISO called TNI. But a lot of our clients do seek GMP accreditation, and I have a fair bit of experience in it, not in dietary supplements, but on medical device manufacturer side, GMP. And so I sort of speak the language, and at its heart, GMP is about quality assurance, similar to ISO. In its core, it's about traceability and continuous improvement. And so clients that we work with that are in the manufacturing space for CBD, and also cannabis products, what they realize are a couple of things. Number one, you can attract more clients, especially if you're a contract manufacturer. Having a certification like that just buttons up a lot of things to make you attractive as a white label or contract manufacturer. But the other thing that any good quality assurance system, including GMP, should give you as a manufacturer is improvement of process and efficiency, right? So it should save money while improving the quality and safety of your product over time. Good.
Yeah, so I think there's something that we should clarify too. Certification and compliance are two different things, but they're also one and the same. So compliance is the letter of the law, right? And so if you're making dietary supplements, you've got to be compliant with CGMP regulations. And what that means is you first and foremost have to be registered with the FDA. That's a common misconception is that you have a license from the FDA. It's not. It's a registration. So they don't grant licenses. You register with them. That puts them on notice that you're going to be manufacturing food products. And in California, where we're located, we also have to be registered with the state of California to manufacture dietary supplements. And so certification is really a third-party thing that you can get for your symbol that just adds an extra layer of certainty. But just understand that if you're manufacturing dietary supplements, you have to be manufacturing in a manner that's compliant with CGMPs. Again, that's registration with the FDA and your state or local health authorities. And so that process is mandatory. A lot of people think like it's not. It is required. And then, as some of the other panelists here have discussed, is ISO certification, and that's actually something that we're pursuing on the cosmetic side, the 9001-22716. And what that really helps to do, and it can help for your brand, is if you have the ISO certification for markets like Europe and Japan, it's really an internationally recognized standard. And so if you're looking to expand internationally and not jump through hoops, it really helps on that side of things as well.
Laura, so on your side.
Thank you. So from our perspective, our company has some experience, just as an example, in the fresh vegetable industry. And, back in the 90s, it became kind of a big push to start meeting these guidelines in terms of traceability, trackability, and I don't know how much you pay attention. I'm actually from Salinas, California, and so it's kind of near and dear to my heart. But there's some of our clients have had troubles with salmonella outbreaks in spinach, as an example. A few years ago, that was a big deal. Well, because they had followed these protocols, they had specific trackability in place, and so they didn't have to recall their entire product necessarily. They were able to pinpoint exactly where that came from, and I think that can be valuable in any industry. So I think that's one example of how this has helped one of our clients.
So, Craig, what are some key areas to assess before starting the application process?
Application for CGMP?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, regardless of whether you're applying for like the third-party CGMP certification, you want to make sure that you're compliant, first of all, and that you can do a self-audit internally to make sure that you meet those criteria. The challenge, I guess, with being a new product is, starting your own operation. That's one of the barriers to entry is, I think there's definitely a place for smaller batch and kind of craft manufacturers. It should have a little bit of leeway to make products in certain volumes because, really when you're looking at CGMP, you're looking at what's the risk, right? So if I make 10,000 units of product, dietary supplements, and they're, contaminated with salmonella or E. coli or maybe something worse, and it gets out, the exposure is a lot of people. And so you just have to look at what you're looking to do, who you're working with. I think this, for everybody in this audience, is who you're working with and what kind of quality management system they have in place. One of the key, on our side, on the manufacturing side, one of the key things that we have to do is we have to identity test every single ingredient that comes in our door, and it has to be quarantined before we can use it, because what used to happen before the overhaul of dietary supplement regulations was, you'd get a white powder that came, from some country overseas that was labeled as vitamin C, but really it was just calcium carbonate or, some other cheap, non-active or worse. It could be something that could hurt people, right? And so these are things that have to be done in the process. So just, I think knowing and seeing for yourself what the quality management system is always a helpful process. So if you have a basic enough understanding to kind of audit the companies that you're working with, that's what I would say.
Yeah, that's definitely from just top to bottom. I mean, you just got to make sure, if you're a product manufacturer, make sure all your farms are licensed through the Department of Agriculture, that they get their products from a locally sustained source, that the labs are at least ISO certified, have something in that realm to make sure that they're doing things properly. Everything is lab tested and certified. And even go as far at a certain point, once you're doing enough, to test your own products and make sure that your products are in line and compliant with what you're actually telling people that it is. So for TWE, what are the biggest challenges that you faced with helping companies pass that application process?
I think the first thing is the company culture. You have to ensure that everybody on board, from top to bottom, bottom to top, that everybody understands the quality management system and that they believe in it and that they will follow through. It's not just a matter of dry labbing. It's not a matter of just filling out a form for the sake of filling out a form. You truly believe in what you do, and you will ensure the quality of that product to make sure that anything that you are releasing into industry, or into commerce, is non-adulterated. It meets that standard of identity, and it meets your quality standards. One thing that Craig touched upon that I just want to reiterate is everyone should understand not only the difference between an accreditation and a certification, but also really researching the type of GMP certification there is. There are a lot of companies out there that are trying to sell GMP certifications, but it's something that would not necessarily be recognized by the regulatory community. And it may not be recognized internationally either. Standards that are GFSI or ISO accreditation, those are accreditations that would be recognized in other countries. So again, with the new industry, there's a lot of companies trying to sell, we can certify your company as GMP certified, but it doesn't mean anything if it's just a stamp that you're putting on a document or your label, and there's nothing to back it up.
I got a follow-up to that, so if anybody wants to answer this, what are some specific things you need to look at through those companies and make sure that the GMC certifications are actually legit? Are there any markers?
For ISO accreditation, once you have your ISO accreditation, they do list it. So you can go back and you can take a look at that, the specific accrediting body, and they will list any companies that have that accreditation.
Okay.
Accreditation bodies must be accredited to perform accreditation for the standards, right? So there is some third party, I don't know if it's the FDA or who would certify an accreditation body to do a GMP certification. But yeah, these bodies have to be accredited to provide accreditation.
Absolutely. So to you, Anthony, so with your ISO certifications, did you guys start that out when on the onset of starting the company, or was that something you processed afterwards?
Nope. We built ISO-ready processes and culture from the day that we opened the doors. That was just my experience in life, coming out of chemistry school, but also working in biotechnology and medical device manufacturing. I presumed that it's pretty hard to overlay something like a quality management system onto a company that's already underway in operations. And so when we opened our doors, even before we had accreditations, we essentially were operating to that level at ISO and TNI, et cetera. So I agree with Tweez that it needs to be part of the culture at the workplace, but it also has to be part of the motivation and the true value by the stakeholders of the company. I mean, people, your employees, you pay them to do things as you want them done, and if they understand as part of the culture that performing to GMP or ISO standards of traceability and cleanliness is exactly what we do, then it's a lot simpler to maintain that standard than trying to overlay it.
So I love that you guys start off with hiring candidates that would follow that company culture, but for companies that are already operating, such as ours, we started as a very small company and we've grown to over 60 employees. And so how do you go about employing or implementing ISO standards in an existing company? A lot of companies want to meet that certification or that accreditation, and so what you do is you ensure that you have already standardized SOPs that everybody's properly trained on. You have the proper documentation, so you're already starting to collect all of the required documentation that would meet that ISO accreditation, and then when you're pursuing that, you look at where your deficiencies are, and you can add to it to make sure that you would comply with the entire quality management system.
Absolutely. And I feel that's one of the biggest things that people overlook in general when they start taking in money is they're not GMP certified, they're not ISO certified, they don't have these specific requirements or SOPs or the right standards in their community base in their company to actually make things work properly on a scalable model. And that's really how you get started, is making sure you have all those compliancies in place before you get going, especially on the regulatory side. If you don't know what's going on in your regulation body, like for example, Massachusetts just banned everything CBD yesterday. If you don't know that and you're doing business in Massachusetts, now you're screwed. So, you need to keep focus on those accreditation bodies, you need to focus on regulations, because if you don't do that in this market, it's a very flimsy market right now, and if you don't understand where you're at, then you could go down very quickly, especially if you're taking on money. So, next question is for testing labs. GMP certification is definitely a very good first step, but there are other license and certifications that you can stand out and be prepared for future FDA regulations. So other than ISO certifications, are there anything else that would be good for testing labs to have?
What we get from ISO as a business, I would say, traceability, control, continuous improvement is satisfactory. I mean, if there's more standards that the lab needs, they would probably relate to, other aspects besides lab testing. A lot of labs dabble a bit in manufacture or pilot manufacture, so maybe we would think about other types of ISO standards besides 17025, which is analytical chemistry, maybe 9001, or even 13485, which is medical devices. But in general, unless it was there was a client demand, we're fairly satisfied, at least from a certification standpoint, with the ISO paradigm.
I'd like to add to that if I could.
Absolutely.
So at Hammer Enterprises, we also have our own in-house analytical lab, and we are also pursuing our 17025 for our lab. It's not necessarily a certification, but what we do is we we participate in proficiency testing. So for those of you who are not in the analytical lab space or even the testing space, proficiency testing, what essentially happens is they send you a standard or they send you a sample, and it's an unknown sample, and you are testing against all the other labs that are participating in the proficiency testing. And if you meet or if you are able to report results that are within that standard deviation, then you would be considered proficient. If you do not, then you don't, obviously, your processes, your sample prep method, your methodology, whatever it is not providing you the most accurate results in comparison to other testing laboratories. And that's essentially another way to help validate your process. What you want to do is you want to ensure that you are validating. In this new emerging space, there are a lot of matrices out there that could interfere in the results. And so you can't have one sample prep method for every single matrix out there. And when I say matrix, I'm talking about chocolates, I'm talking about concentrates, I'm talking about tinctures. There's so many different products out there. You have to have a very specific sample prep method, and it may be streamlined, it may not. You won't know unless you actually test it. So you have to ensure that you are able to validate your sample prep method and then test it, and then not only validate against other laboratories, but also participate in proficiency testing. There aren't that many bodies out there that will do the proficiency testing, but Emerald Scientific is one of them, and that's something that we have in-house. And they also have their ISO accreditation to be a proficiency testing laboratory or certifying body.
I'm musing for a second. So, Anthony, there's been a lot of talk the last couple of years with lab shopping for testing labs. Do you think they should be doing proficiency testing on a lot of these testing labs as a requirement in these states that are legal?
Proficiency testing is, I don't know that it's a requirement of ISO, but in California, it is a requirement by the BCC by rule. So if you're operating in that space as a lab, you absolutely must do it. It is a requirement of a standard called TNI, which in Oregon, instead of ISO, our labs are accredited to TNI, which is the NEWAC Institute. It's a national environmental laboratory quality standard that is ISO at its core, but it has some differences because it's more focused on environmental test labs. So proficiency testing is super important, but keep in mind that except for the most basic of matrices, proficiency testing a lot of times involves just a liquid vial, where the material that you're testing is a complex matrix. In the very beginning, meaning like 2014, that's all you could get were like these snap and shoot glass vials. And so we're actually testing cannabis and trying to extract cannabinoids or pesticides from cannabis as our routine assays, but the PTs would just be these little glass vials with no matrix. More and more companies like Emerald and also Finova, which is a Colorado company, offer in-matrix PTs, and that's definitely already here for pesticides, for residual solvents, for cannabinoids, and a little bit with microbiology as well. As far as lab shopping, I mean, I think it's important. You're a consumer of what the lab is selling, and you definitely should lab shop. Now, let me tell you, understand what you should be shopping for before you go lab shopping. And hopefully, I said this before, it's not the cheapest and fastest, but there's a lot of other things to consider when you're lab shopping.
Awesome. So, for Laura and Craig, do you feel having GMP certifications at each step of the product chain from extraction to distribution is important?
So for me, and our expertise, the certification itself is not critical. From our perspective, it's more following the protocol, and mainly around, I guess I'll call it cleanliness, safe food handling, that kind of thing. As an example, you want to make sure that your HVAC systems are up to snuff. I've had many projects, not necessarily in the cannabis space, but I can remember a water company that wanted to follow, it's called Safe Quality Food, SQF practices. And they wanted to follow that protocol, yet they didn't want to do everything they had to do on the facility side to get there. So So I think that it's not necessarily the certification is important from where I stand, but the process itself and making sure that you're taking into consideration best practices around the facility in terms of making sure all your surfaces are cleanable. If you have exposed pipes, they should be off of the surface so that you can clean behind them. Otherwise, they should be behind the walls. The walls should be rodent-proof. There's all sorts of things that lots of times people don't think about. Pressurization concerns, that's a big deal as well. So that's my thoughts on that.
And my thoughts on that are very similar to Laura's. You want to know who you're getting your product from, and so there are some processes in the GMP process for us as a manufacturer that we have to kind of vet who our suppliers are, which makes sourcing from really big companies a lot easier for us because they're established, and when you send a questionnaire over to them about their processes and what processes they have, it's like clockwork because they're so used to doing it. I think when we're talking about CBD and hemp oil, it's a little bit more challenging because you've got a lot of these smaller farms and smaller extractors that are putting out product, and sometimes if you don't have a very good feeling or understanding of what their processes are, part of the standard is to vet your supplier, and so even doing an on-site audit is one of the important things now, is because if you're looking for vitamin C, there's a lot of suppliers, and I use that one because it's such a common ingredient. But hemp, sometimes the best hemp that you can get is from a really small local grower, an extractor, and so you don't want to just go with the big companies because it's easier for you. So it's always a balance of that. But having GMP suppliers throughout the chain certainly makes the process easier.
And so, like you're saying, going with big companies, I mean, would you guys agree it's better, like you said, to go with smaller ones because a lot of these bigger companies do mass production, so most likely they're not going through just one farm. So, I mean, now you're going to have to think about different licenses, different testing results from each of those farms, where it's coming from, especially if they're doing hundreds of thousands of kilos a week or whatnot of processing. How do you know whether they're going to go through that process of testing every single product?
Yeah, I don't think you can say one is necessarily better than the other. It's just that because a company is small and they don't have CGMP certification, it doesn't mean they're not as good.
So for a company, if they're trying to market themselves as something better off, that they're either complying with these policies, what would show them to other companies as being that compliant measure, like on the outskirts? Do they have to do, walkthrough testing where you actually go on site and take a look at it, or are there some things that you can put online that would show that you're more compliant than anybody else?
I think a quality management system is really important. Just ensuring that you've got some processes written down on what happens if something is within spec, what happens if it's not in spec, and what that whole process looks like and how it connects to every other part, which is, it's the most challenging part of it, but it's how you keep things safe.
Would it be good to have that as like a questionnaire, like a Q&A section, or like how we do our processes and what we do, just to kind of answer those questions without having to send a questionnaire? And any of you guys can answer this.
So, as a former health inspector, I would say, and I don't disagree with Craig. I do understand that any sort of certification or accreditation is very expensive. Not only is the audit itself expensive, but having qualified individuals within your company, within your firm, that understand the regulations, that are able to employ what is required, that is very expensive, and it's not in the reach of every company. It's definitely something that everyone should strive for, because regardless of what you say to me, I want verification. I want to conduct my second-party audits of any supplier. I want to ensure that a third-party audit that is objective, that has nothing at stake other than coming in to ensure that you're following your quality management system, and that you have everything in place that will, address anything from nonconformances to how you do your returns and how you notify people for recalls and so on and so forth. I want to ensure that any ingredient supplier, any primary packaging supplier has all of that documentation.
Great. So I got one last question for you guys, and then we'll open it up to questions. So we're talking about certifications and having these certifying bodies, regulate you guys and you guys stay compliant, but with all these fly-by-night companies, does it really matter right now to the consumer that they're buying these products? They're just buying things from Amazon or whatnot, and they're not really looking at that. How do you portray to them as a company that you're being regulated, you're going by compliancy measures, that you're certified? How do you show that to them so they can say, yes, this is the product that I want and this is not snake oil?
Well, in Colorado, which is where we operate, we are regulated by not only the Colorado Department of Agriculture, but also the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. We work very closely with both regulatory agencies to ensure that not only are we training them on the industry, because it's very new, but also that we are collaborating with them so that they can create fair regulation and fair enforcement of the industry. So that's number one. Number two, what I would also say is that as a company, so a part of working with regulatory is a part of what is the company culture for that company. So you really need to know where do you know your source? Do you know this company? Have you verified what they are talking about? And then in addition, is it coming from a state that has an industrial hemp program? Or are you getting it from a state that has absolutely no program, no regulatory oversight, nothing? So you have to ensure that, number one, it's coming from an approved source, coming from a state that has a program, identifying whether or not they are licensed with the regulatory agencies within that state. In addition, do they have accreditations or certifications? And again, be very wary of GMP certified, because there's no regulatory agency that will say, yes, we recognize this GMP certificate from this fly-by-night company. That's not what it is. They would recognize a global standard, sure, which is a separate entity in and of itself, but it's not a requirement. So, if you have all of these things in place and you're ensuring that you're very transparent in your company and your communication and working very closely with your clients, then I think that's how you can build up confidence in your company and your commodity.
Anybody else want to add to that?
I always tell people that certifications are nice. It's how businesses benchmark their quality assurance and safety. It's how they get efficiency and control of safety and quality. But in a B2B sense, it's like a calling card, right? It opens the door, it facilitates connections initially. But if you're going to be doing business with somebody on a B2B level, whether it's a analytical lab who's producing data for you, or a manufacturing lab who's producing a product for you, or even a consumer, safety, quality is visible, right? If you go around in a laboratory or a manufacturing space, number one, it should be clean, it should be organized, the surfaces should be cleanable surfaces, there should be, books and procedures. It's also a point of pride with the people who do it, and that stuff is always very visible. And if you're going to be doing business with a company, seeing their GMP certification should tell you, we can get started in this process, but ultimately, if it's really important and there's product and money and quality on the line, you need to go there and look at it. And none of the things that are manufactured for you, whether it's data or physical products, should be manufactured behind closed doors in a place that you can't see. Almost none of what we're talking about is proprietary technology. It's just really hard to do it, and that's why it's simple. But there shouldn't really be any, curtains around either the data that you're purchasing or the products that you're purchasing. Quality is visible.